I had no idea 9/11 was coming. I had no idea like all this combat and all this, stuff was going to happen. But I just said, yeah, let me do that.
Hey there, this is Patrick Brennan,
I'm Daniel Bell.
and this is AfterSOF.
Today we had Travis Clovis, a retired Air Force Special Operations Command helicopter pilot.
And Travis had a lot of wisdom to share, specifically with knowing yourself and knowing the skill set you've got from your experience in SOF, and focusing on that rather than your war stories. He also talked a little bit about sort of knowing what you don't want to do is more important than knowing or trying to figure out what you want to do, right? Process of elimination. Travis had a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm really excited for you guys to watch.
We look forward to seeing you next week, but enjoy this episode and have a great week. You're talking about your growing up in the military as an Air Force brat. So what
Yep.
was it that drew you into service?
It's. I guess I should be totally truthful and not give you a pat answer. I grew up around the Air Force. My dad was a fighter pilot. Um, I I thought it was cool, but I didn't think that was for me. I was kind of I was a bookish kid. I am a bookish kid. I was really good at school. I was an okay athlete, but not any great shakes, and that wasn't sort of my deal. And I kind of hit my teenage years. My dad was a F-16 squadron commander. I hit my teenage years. I started to develop new interests outside of books and video games. And I saw all these like I don't know, 24, 25-year-old dudes, and they were all driving Porsches, and they all had, very nice looking wives. And I was like, man, what is this? Like, what is this all about? Like, these guys seem cool. These are all F-16 pilots, and these guys seem cool, and they seem to be living a life that I'm interested in living. Let me figure out more about this. And then just as a weird aside, my dad was an Air Force Academy grad also, and towards the end of his command tour, his ops officer, one of his classmates, died in a plane crash. And in the course of sort of going through all the casualty notification and memorial service, I pulled out his old yearbooks and I was like, oh, okay, here's Barry. Barry was your classmate. Did you know him at the academy? And I just sort of became aware of the academy. We had never had a conversation about where I was going to go to college or any of that kind of stuff. And I hadn't considered it. And so it just sort of, there was this like, just kind of moment of like, all these, and then you sort of go back and you're like, oh, did this guy go to the academy? Did this guy go to the academy? And you find out that a bunch of these lieutenants that I looked up to, they were all academy grads. And so then it was like, oh, 2 + 2 = 4. Let me go to the Air Force Academy, and do this. And so, we visited the Air Force Academy later on, and I kind of was like, man, this is really neat. There's a lot of cool stuff going on here. Let me try this out. And even when I got there, like I still wasn't committed to flying jets. It wasn't like, I wasn't one of these kids at 6 years old that looked up and was like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up. I've kind of, man, I've kind of stumbled into most things in my life that are good. And so, which is challenging because it's really hard to replicate. Um, but yeah, so I went to the academy. I had the opportunity, during one of my, I think it was like spring break my freshman year. I went to Nellis Air Force Base. I stayed with one of my dad's backseater when he was an F4 pilot. And I literally went to the weapons school, with friends of the family, people that we knew when my dad was a squadron commander. And I was able to wrangle a backseat ride in a Strike Eagle in an F-16. And like after the second ride, I was like, oh, okay, this is for sure what I'm going to do. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to go fly jets and do that kind of stuff. Um, so that was sort of my entree into it is I guess the cynical part of me would be like, well, you just didn't want to sort of make any hard choices about your life and what you wanted to be, so you just went into the family business. Um, but yeah, that's sort of how I kind of ended up. in the Air Force, and ended up at the academy, kind of like at least set that initial
But
vector for my
that
life.
academy life, I was stationed at West Point prior to going to the 160th, and I would assume to a certain extent many of the academies are going to have that difficult balance of it's almost like you're going through officer basic while you're going to college. So you have to have some grit while you're doing that. Um, I what was there anything that you had to overcome while you were there that kind of led you into being a rotary wing pilot? And did you start off, because you're sitting here telling me about the fighter jet stuff, and then we transition over into rotary wing? Can you kind of talk about that academy time, and then
Yeah,
what led you to fly rotary wing versus some fixed wing aircraft?
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I think definitely I don't want to come on and be the defender of the service academies, because again, you come out and there are folks that unfortunately give us the reputation as ring knockers. I think that they're a small kind of minority. The service academies are hard. They're hard because it's a lot of academics. The academics are challenging, but like people that go to MIT and Harvard, like those academics are really, really challenging. It's just they don't have all the, you got to go play intramural sports, and you got to do military training, and you got to do all these other things, and they also don't typically have the volume of academics. And so it's not one thing. It's just kind of the totality of the workload. And everybody, there are some just complete absolute freaks out there that go and they can double major in aero and astro and be like, I actually, one of my roommates, a guy that I went through basic training with, was he was a Division One gymnast. He was a double major in aero and astro with like a math minor. He got a, I don't know, 3.8 GPA, and he never seemed. I'm sure he had challenges. I don't know what they were. They never came out when we were roommates, but he couldn't write to save his life. Like I would edit his papers, and he sucked at writing. So that's Mark Emily's like weakness in the world, and I would tell him to his face today. Um, but otherwise, like there are those people, but most of us struggled with, was it the volume of work? Was it the leadership? Like leadership is a hard thing to teach an 18-year-old, regardless of where they are. And different services have different ways of doing that. But you're trying to be in charge of people, but you're barely in charge of yourself. And so that was all just the challenge of the academies. Again, I don't want to defend the academies against people that are cynical about them. I found it to be a valuable piece of kind of like becoming an adult. I think the one of the most valuable things I learned there was just the 1,000-yard stare, which was like, okay, somebody is going to yell at you. There's going to be some like hard professional experience, and sometimes the best thing you can do is just clam up and just look at the wall across from you and just wait for it to be over. And I think that that's a life skill that is underestimated in the world. So I learned a little bit more than just that, but that one came into play probably more than I would like in my career. Um, Somewhere along the line, like I said, I was pretty committed to flying jets. I actually had a couple more opportunities through various programs to go out and fly. Um, and typically F-16s, I think, is where I have most of my backseat rides. I went to Korea for our ops air force, like our sort of before our junior year. They send folks out to different bases for 3 weeks, and you kind of become like a third lieutenant program, is what they used to call it. I got to go to Osan, Korea, and I actually got to fly in the back of a Pavlo in Osan, and I was like, "Oh, this is pretty awesome! Like, this is neat." And then I had buddies that were all, like guys that wanted to go be Navy SEALs. I had guys that wanted to go into special tactics. And I just, there was something about that just really, like, I was a little bit of a fanboy. I read this book by a guy named Douglas Waller, former Newsweek reporter, wrote a book called The Commandos. And basically, it has chapters about Robin Sage, it has chapters about Buds. It's like one of the sort of like the first, like, this is what SOF is about. And there's a chapter about Pavlo in there, and I remember reading that. And then just the last reference in Clear and Present Danger, Tom
Hmm.
Clancy, the one where they go and sort of fight the drug lords. I think that's Clear and Present Danger. The team is inserted by Pavlos, and so I just like all these things, sort of like, hey, this is something you should think about. So I graduated the academy. I went to grad school for a year at the University of Arizona. So being a second lieutenant, getting a full paycheck, and going to school for like half time in Tucson was terrible, and I would never recommend it to anybody. That was pretty all right. And then I went to pilot training, and then just the way that Air Force pilot training worked up until relatively recently was everybody would start off in T-37s, and then you would track halfway through. You would track off, and there was a fighter bomber track that would go to T-38s. There was a tanker transport track that would go to T-1s. There was a turboprop track where you would go down to Corpus Christi and fly T-44s with the Navy, and then there was a helicopter track. And so different people have different desires. I put T-38s as my number one, and I put helicopters as my number two, and then I put T-44s and then T-1s as the last one, like death before dishonor. Um, and man, people are going to be really mad at me at the end of this. Um, and then just sort of, as we worked through, there were, this is probably what everybody that doesn't get what they want in life says, but there were 5 slots for T-38s. I was like the number 6 guy in the order of merit. And so they go down the list and they're like, hey, no more T-38s. What do you want to do? I actually got a call the night before our track select. I should have known. I'm pretty stupid. I got a call from our flight commander, and he wanted to verify my rank order. And he's like, okay. And he walked me through the scenario. He's like, is this what you want? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah, this is what I want. I had no interest in flying transport. It's not something that appeals to me. I wanted something tactical. And like I said, I had this kind of like love for the SOF community before I was even in it. And I just wanted to be around it. And if I couldn't drop bombs, I wanted to like do something else. And so that led me to that. It was weird. Like when I got helicopters, I was a little bit sort of like, it was a little bit of a gut punch. And I was like, man, this kind of sucks. I really wanted T-38s. My dad was in the audience. And again, going back to that kind of previous part of the conversation, like my dad loves me because, he loves me,
Hmm.
not because I was in the Air Force or anything, but I felt like I had like let him down a little bit, as well as let myself down. Uh, and I actually had somebody come up to me and they're like, hey, like helicopters are cool, but you'll never get promoted. And I'm like a second lieutenant. I just had this like, emotional experience, and I got this like old passed over major telling me that like my career's over. And I'm like, God, this sucks. Um, and so, it was a little bit of like experiencing defeat. And you're like, okay, well, what do I do with this? And you're like, I'm going to go to Fort Rucker and I'm going to be the best helicopter pilot I can be. I'm going to track this off. And so I kind of made that my mission. And, I went to Fort Rucker. Helicopters are weird and hard. And I'm like, okay, this is different. But, I did pretty well there, and I tracked to Pavlos. And then so, that led me to our schoolhouse at Kirtland, kind of in the January 2000. I finished pilot training in October of 2000. Then I started my schoolhouse at Kirtland in January of 2001.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I guess I should mention also, because we sort of jumped right into it. So I'm like old. Like I graduated the academy in '98, which is like, oh, that's so last century. Um, but yeah, so I started the schoolhouse in January of '01. I know 9/11, I think, is one of those sort of
Hmm.
pivotal life moments for most people. And it's either the impetus for them getting in, or like I'm on the other side of that. This isn't like virtue signaling or anything like that, but I went into SOF thinking like, oh man, I'm going to do a bunch of exercises, and I'm going to, like maybe there'll be that one mission that you go and like infill guys into Colombia to kill drug lords or something like that, and that'll be it, and it'll be cool. And then come 9/11, like we were doing a sim. We were almost done with the program, so it was like our third PAVE sim, so our TFTA portion, terrain following portion of the training syllabus. So the last the last section. So we're doing the simulators before we go back to the flight line and do all of our flights. And we're sitting in the sim, and they're like, we take a break. They're like, hey, you guys got to go move your cars. And we're like, what are you talking about? We had to move them back. They're like, yeah, the FPCon on the base changed, and so you got to go move your cars. I'm like, all right. And then we go move our cars. We come back in. We're flying, and then they're like, hey, we got to stop the sim. And I'm like, okay. They're like, somebody flew an airplane into the World Trade Center, and I was like a Cessna or something. Like, this is weird, like bad weather. And they're like, no, you got to go back to your squadron. So we drove over to the squadron building. And again, I on some of these other podcasts, people talk about like being in a room and with a bunch of people watching a TV. Those are the same thing. Like, we walk into the squadron, and the ops desk is the first thing you run into, and it's all the instructors are standing at the ops desk watching the TV, and we watch the second tower come down. And we're all students. It's like two pilots and two flight engineers, and we're like, what is going on? And then our commander, Tim Leahy at the time, who ended up being the J3 at SOCOM before he retired, he kind of said, hey, here's what we know. Everybody go home. Everything's suspended. We're going to figure out when we're going to pick up the flying schedule. And, everybody starts talking. They're like, oh man, bet guys are getting ready right now and this and that. And I'm like, shit, there's going to be a war, and I'm going to miss it. And in retrospect, I'm like, what a stupid fucking thing to say. Like, it was ludicrous, but I didn't know. So we kind of finished the program with this. I don't want to say hanging over our heads, but like this was our motivation. It was like, this is for real. Probably made it a little bit more serious. And then I went to Hurlburt. I got to Hurlburt beginning in December of 2001, and I was in Afghanistan in early April of 2002, and that just kind of launched, at least the first portion of my career was, mostly combat deployments. Yeah. And I it's sort of weird to say, but like, I'm thankful. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. I'm not sure I was as well prepared. I never did a JRX. I was at Hurlburt for 3 years. I never did a JRX, a TFT, a multi-lat. I didn't do any of those until I was a lieutenant colonel in my career. I just went to combat. Yeah. And so I went to Afghanistan. I almost died there a couple times. I was part of the initial invasion of Iraq. I did 3 tours in Iraq while I was at Hurlburt. I went to Mildenhall. That was a different kind of flying. Got to do some different stuff. But I did another Iraq tour while I was stationed in Mildenhall. I did a NEO out of Lebanon while I was there. And then that sort of ended my Pablo portion of my career.
So I think it's really interesting when we were talking this last week. You were earlier in the conversation. You talk about how you're kind of Air Force centric in a way, but then when we look at what goes on in combat, and a lot of our flight leads and other people who are even general officers now, you worked with them because you were part of a joint task force. So on the battlefield and operations, you're not as Air Force centric. I mean, your focus is on what the Air Force has to do in that mission, but you're not as Air Force centric even on the job as what a lot of us feel like we are, like for whatever branch that we're part of.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we always joke you can't spell joint without ARMY. So you show up. It depends on who you're supporting, and again, without sort of going down into the rabbit hole, because I think most of the audience obviously will know. And for folks that are sort of looky-loos that are watching that are not familiar, it's probably not worth trying to describe the entire big tent that is SOCOM. But let's just say there's sort of, I don't even want to use the term white SOF and black SOF, but you have sort of the task force, and then you have everybody else. And it's not a more than, lesser than. I think that sort of 20 years of combat kind of proved out. It's just these people have one boss, and they have a certain skill set, and they're resourced in a certain way, and they have some personnel policies that allow them to sort of do things a certain way, and then everybody else is still doing heavy lifting. It's just a different focus and different mission set. But yeah, we never talked to Air Force guys. We were in we did the initial invasion of Iraq. We were based down south in Ali Al Salim in Kuwait. I know there was a task force out in the west, and then there was the guys from Mildenhall. They supported all the stuff up north at the 173rd airdrop. That who's
Joe.
the
Joe
SOC on
King.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What a great two episodes! Like if people only watch two episodes, like watch those two, the two parter, because that one was awesome. But that 173rd airdrop, there were Pavlos on the ground in northern Iraq that cleared the drop zone for those C-17s. The C-17 guys don't always talk about that, but so there was like this was a massive soft war. So we did the first part of the invasion. We were not loved by the host base when we were there the first time. I went home for a few months. I came back in sort of the fall of 2003. That's kind of some of the stories we were talking about the other
Mm-hmm.
day, Daniel. Was that deployment? Uh, we moved from Ali Al Salim up to Bayap, and we showed up, and the Air Force host unit there, they were like, "Who are you guys?" Like, the Air Force has helicopters, and we're like, "Yeah, man, like we're part of you," and it was weird. We got much more love from sort of task force leadership, much more support from the task force than we ever did from our own service, and that's not like sour grapes. It's just we were part of the SOCOM world, and I guess people were sort of happy to treat us that way. And I think we were also happy to just be part of that cohort, as it were. So yeah, your peers tend to be, you're sort of like, who was the ODA commander that I flew, on this deployment, and then you sort of track them up through your career, that sort of stuff, or who was the flight lead that I flew with on this exercise, and you sort of track them up through their career, and it leads to sort of an interesting network.
Yeah. It's funny. Funny is not the right word, but it's interesting talking about, right? Because several of the guys we've interviewed so far, were military prior to 9/11, right? So it's always interesting to hear that story and how that changed. And your story about, getting advice after your assignment from, a major that's been passed over, right? This is all pre 9/11. So he's like, oh, you're not going to do anything for your career. 9/11 happens. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, now this is the center of the world, right? Because the the career option that you were selected to go into as a second option is now, sort of probably leading the way. And did that have, as a special missions unit throughout your career, early part of your career? I mean, I assume that kind of leapfrogged your advancements later on.
Yeah, maybe. I think that, again, just philosophical point. Bloom where you're planted. Just do well at whatever your task is, and good things happen to you. I think there's also, kind of if you look at the world negatively, the world will be negative, and if you look at the world positively, the world will be positive. I mean, again, this is all like Dr. Phil stuff, but I think that it's true. I think I had a passion, again, going back to, I just had a passion for SOF. I don't think I really understood it when I got into it. And again, our path to, on the Air Force side, outside of the special tactics, our path is different than the rest of the SOF components. We don't really have a firm assessment and selection. It's a thing. So you kind of have to grow into the role a little bit on the AfSOC aviation side. And the guys that are successful, I think, just have the soft mentality. They didn't lift logs and do pull-ups to get there. They just went through a training program and sort of grew into it. But yeah, it wasn't why I chose it. And honestly, I don't think it was what I was worried about throughout my career. I just wanted to do the best job that I could. And I was able to achieve what I consider some career success because of that. I think also, just practically speaking, I was in a small community that was getting a lot of attention, and the way that the Air Force promotes people, if you have, it's really easy to throw down, you know, hey, this guy had 4 deployments during his last rating period, and he flew X number of combat hours, and he did this, EKIA and all these metrics that at the end of the day maybe don't mean anything, but they look really good on an
Mm-hmm.
OPR. And when other people are, this is where if I'd been a fighter guy, who knows what would have happened? I mean, if you're an F-15 guy, the war on terror meant nothing to you, quite frankly. And it's not a value judgment about those guys. It's not that they're not great Americans or very talented individuals. It's just, man, bad timing, bro. So, I mean, if you ended up being all those C-130 guys that finished in the middle of their pilot training class that ended up in gunships, some of them became like real live war
Mm-hmm.
heroes, and some of those F-15 guys that were zipper suited sun gods, they're flying around defending the airspace against Cessnas. So it just is what it
Yeah.
is. It's really, I'm gonna get, like, you guys may get hate mail.
I love the
So
egos in the aviation world, but
look, it takes a certain kind of personality. We talked
mm-hmm.
about this the other day, right? We sort of talked about the little bird community, and particularly like the
The sixes
AH-6
versus yeah,
guys.
the
And
AHs versus the
yeah,
MHs.
and
Yeah.
man, God bless them though. I mean, like, there's a self selection that happens
Mm-hmm.
there, right? Like, if you're sort of some shrinking violet that is like, I don't know, guys, like, you're probably not going to be very good at pointing the nose of your tiny little helicopter at somebody and getting within like literal arm's length distance and shooting them in the face. That's a thing that requires a certain personality to
Mm-hmm.
do. It's kind of the same with special mission units. I mean, it takes a different kind of person to do some of the things that those guys do, to walk through a door and shoot somebody in the face, like literal knife range. I mean, I don't think people appreciate what that's all about, and they see movies where guys go through, and it's like, that's not, I don't think that's what it's like. And I don't claim to know it either. I'm not trying to be like, oh, I know what it's like. I don't know what it's like, but I imagine it takes a different kind of person, and that's why the assessment and selection is
Mm-hmm.
so hard. And some of that comes with ego. You got to be a little bit kind of, I'm the best in the world, and if you don't think that, maybe it's not the line of work for you. So
Yeah, yeah, and all the while, where you climbed the ladder, you retired as a lieutenant colonel, or
I retired. I was at '06.
okay,
I had pinned on, but I retired as a
okay.
lieutenant colonel. I only had 18
Yeah, so
months. So
you're balancing all of this, and you're looking at how you're able to be competent in combat. You've got to maintain your hours when you're not deployed. You've got to all these different things, and then in your career, you're like, okay, I'm retiring, and you could have done what we call the high three, right? You could have done the high three and have that kernel on your ID card and everything else. But what was it that pulled you into transitioning out into the private sector?
yeah, no, it's a really good question. So for me, it was a combination of factors. My wife is I met my wife when I went through my initial PAVE training. She's active duty Air Force. She's still active duty. And in the middle of our career, we spent 5 years apart. So we went to our intermediate developmental education, our service school, and then I went to Cannon Air Force Base. She went to DC, and we had at the time we had a 1 year old. So between like 1 and 6, I saw my son like once a month, and it was like being deployed constantly for 5 years. And it sucked, and I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it then, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it now. It sucked. It was terrible. It was bad for me personally, and it's probably only because she's like one of the best human beings that I've ever met in my life that we were able to sort of work through it. But it was terrible, and so we were kind of coming up on we were able to get back together. We lived in DC together. Then we both went down to Northwest Florida when I went to headquarters AfterSOF. So that was a piece of it. Was it looked like our paths were going to potentially take us apart again? So that was a piece of it. I had some other stuff going on, and some physical stuff going on that I was like, this isn't getting any easier. And so it just kind of it was an inflection point, and it was also a timing thing of like, if I take another assignment, then I've got to buy 2 more years of active duty service commitment. And so I just ran through the calculus, and I'm like, hey, I think the needs of the service and then the needs of Travis Clovis have become incompatible. And that's the point where people have to, I used to always joke when I was younger, I'm like, I'll quit doing it when it's not fun anymore. And I don't know that that's actually what happened. I don't know that it was less fun than it was when I was a captain. But it was also this, I had to choose what I wanted to do with my life as a person. And so the timing was, I probably need to go. I don't know that I'm gonna be continue to be successful here, and I don't know that I'm gonna bring 100% of myself to work. And I have this, like, I don't want to make myself sound like, oh, how cool I am. Like, I just have this like overwhelming duty concept. Like I just like duty. Like, if you want to talk philosophy and talk about like the concept of like, what do you owe and what's your responsibility. Like, for me, I always felt like, if I'm not going to give 100% to the organization, I need to step out of the way and let somebody else come in. Like, that's what the Air Force meant to me. And it's just, especially in the soft business, it's so important. Like, people's lives literally are on the line because of somebody just doing the smallest thing right and not being distracted, and not being like thinking over here and half-assing it. And I didn't feel confident that I was going to be fully invested. And so that's a long answer to a short question of kind of why I made the decision to leave.
And then, so let's talk about what you're doing right now. What pulled you into this professional career from being, because you aren't in aviation anymore?
Yeah, I think, similar to what some of the other guys have said. I wanted to take a step away. I think that, for me, it's not sour grapes or anything. Again, going back to just my preferences for flying, I couldn't fly an airline. Like, I just don't. I have no desire. It's not something that is compelling to me. If I was going to go fly, I'd fly for like border patrol
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. Like, I want to do something tactical. I want to be low to the ground. I want to do those sort of things. And so, um, just the airlines was not something I wanted to do. Honestly, I didn't want to be a defense contractor either. I didn't just want to go be Colonel Clovis in a different location, wearing a Lockheed polo suit, polo shirt or something like that. And so I wanted to try something different. I have a long and painful transition story that I'll spare you all the details of, but I thought it would be a good idea to take a year off, to just kind of like recage. My wife's assignment cycle, was gonna, she was gonna move in a year. So I was like, well, I don't want to like get a job in Northwest Florida and then immediately have to turn around and do this. This is all pre-COVID, and my plan was all going pretty well, up until, sort of March of 2020. I had some interviews. I kind of had a lead on something that I thought was going to be pretty good, and then COVID hit and just kind of blew everything up. And so my year off turned into probably about 18 months off, which was longer than I wanted, maybe a little bit longer than that even. Um, it kind of sucked. Like, I was like, I'd watched all of Netflix, and I was like, all right, I got to figure something out. Um, but so I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I'd had all these like long discussions with people about, hey, tell me about insurance. And I'm like, I don't want to do insurance. Tell me about real estate. Don't want to do real estate. No offense. Tell me about this. Tell me about that. And so I did all this, like all these exploratory things that I would absolutely recommend people do, is just like reach out, figure out what you want to do, even if it's by process of elimination of like, that doesn't sound appealing to me. Like, you got to sort of tighten your shot group and figure out what you want to do. I sort of ran this circuitous route through venture capital, and kind of ended up with startups. And I was like, oh, maybe I want to go work for a startup. Like, I think that there's something very cool. It's very American. Like, I'm gonna do something new, and I'm going to succeed or I'm going to fail, and it just is what it is. And if you succeed, you can point to it and go, I was part of that. And if you fail, you can also point to it and go, yep, that's my fault. And so I thought, hey, like, let me get into a startup. I think the other piece about startup, that this is my minor sales pitch for soft guys coming out. There's a lot of like risk, and you got to sort of really work through the finances and figure out what, like, how much risk you can sustain, and like lifestyle risk, and some of those other things. But it's, man, soft guys are like, you're sort of taught to be a jack of all trades. You're kind of like, you're taught to do Windows, and if you get into a startup at an early enough stage, they definitely need people that do Windows. And so I'm not a SME in product development. I'm good at a lot of things. Like, I'm okay at a lot of things. Like, I don't even want to say I'm good at a lot of things. And I'm a quick study, and I'm sort of can think my way through problems, and I can help. I can prioritize, and I can do some of these other things. So it's seemingly a good fit. The actual direct connection to the company was, I'm involved with a group called Special Operations Transition Foundation. Lauren Manley, I think, is the one that linked us up. I know Joe Bernard mentioned it as well. So shout out to SODIF. They're awesome. They're a great transition group for soft vets that are moving out into the commercial sector. Um, I went to an event in 2019 in Nashville. I met a guy. I don't even remember when we actually met. He remembered it. I met a guy, a soft civil affairs guy, and he reached out to me in sort of late 2020, and he's like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember, we met here. Do you want to talk to me about this company?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm sure. I'm not doing anything else right now. Let me take this phone call." And he kind of described the tech that they were building, and he kind of described, this is what they're going after, and they needed a project manager, for a contract that they were about to start. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to be a project manager for the rest of my life, but let me at least have the conversation. And so I sat down, I talked to the founders. We sort of talked it over. I'm like, it sounds like you guys need a chief of staff. And they're like, yeah, we need that too. And I'm like, okay, well, I can do that also. And if I could do project management. Anyway, that was like 15 months ago, 16 months ago, and it's been a whirlwind. But that's how I got into tech. It's not because I'm a tech guy. I have a political science major from the academy. I suck at coding. I'm not good at any of that stuff. I'm good at kind of talking to people. I'm good at making connections. I'm good at understanding how systems work. All that stuff is helpful. And then, just like what I don't know, I study at night. And so that's a long answer to how I sort of ended up where I'm at. Was directly, it was the byproduct of
Mm-hmm.
networking. It specifically is the byproduct of soft networking. Indirectly, it was a longer process of, let me figure out what I want to do, which really turned into, let me figure out what I don't want to do. And I do think I've kind of tightened my shot group a little bit, but I still kind of have this, again, maybe it's ego. I still have this idea that, well, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do this. I know that I'm never going to be a CFO. I know that I have no desire to do that. I think I probably fit more closely in an operations role. The product role is interesting, because it's kind of like one foot in the like tech development and one foot in the sort of business side of things. So I'm kind of trying to run with that right now, and see where that leads me.
I love that. I mean, you know, I transitioned in 2010, right? But so I don't know what specifically is
Mm-hmm.
being given to these guys that are transitioning out more recently through these programs. But like what you just described is, and what Joe Bernard had described previously, is like networking and figuring out what you don't want to do, right? I think we tend to, you know, any career, anybody trying to either graduate in college, wherever you're trying to look for what's next, we tend to focus on what do you want to do, right? That's the question. What do you want to do? And I don't know, right? Like, you've got to figure out what you don't want to do first, and then opportunities will present.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, there are guys out there, and God bless them. There are guys out there that have very clear visions of what they want to do post military, and I think they are advantaged, from the perspective of, if you know where you want to go, it's a lot easier to plan. Um, I've never, again, I just, I'm self-aware enough to know that I didn't plan to become, mighty soft warrior of the sky. I don't think I became that anyway, but I didn't plan to become a payload
Mm-hmm.
pilot. I just, like, not 15 years ahead of time and then worked my way towards it. I just sort of said, okay, here's where I'm at. Here's the path that I'm on. What's available to me, and I think I've been a good judge of opportunity. Like, my wife, like, I didn't go out. I was actually, I won't say that. Um, I was a good judge of opportunity, and I said, hey, there's something good here. I'm probably not gonna do much better than this. Like, this is like, I should just, like, cash in right now. And so I married her, and then, like go to helicopters, go to Pavlo, go into soft. Like, I didn't know what that was going to be like. I had no idea 9/11 was coming. I had no idea, like, all this combat and all this, stuff was going to happen. But I just said, yeah, let me do that. Let me take advantage of it. I went to the Pentagon. I know people are like, oh, the Pentagon, it's terrible. I love the Pentagon. I was in ASD Solic, but I wasn't doing soft stuff mostly. I was doing, like, humanitarian assistance and stuff. But I, I was like, this is an opportunity. Like, let me explore this. And so, again, I don't know that I wanted to be a product guy in the tech sector, but it was an opportunity that presented itself. And so I think that you have to know what path you don't want to go down, and you also have to pick a path. Like, those are the things that I think guys need to work through. But I always go back. I'm like, don't freak out about not knowing what you want to be when you grow up. I think most of us probably don't know what we want to be when we grow up. And so the guys that are successful are the guys that can continue to move under conditions of uncertainty and not stagnate. Like, that was something I was doing a little bit, sort of in the sort of the depths of COVID. Was I felt like I was stagnating a little bit. Like, I had some opportunities that fell off the radar. I sort of started feeling sorry for myself. I had, like, 2 solid weeks where I just felt like the sorriest for myself I'd ever felt in my life, and that's not a useful emotion. It's it doesn't help you. And I was stagnating, so I sat down and I'm like, I got to do something. So I sat down. I did, like, a data analytics course online. I learned some software. Um, I don't use that software at all. I don't do data analytics at my company, but it helped me develop a language. It helped me build a skill set. I threw some shit on my LinkedIn about it, and so but I had to do something to kind of just, like, not sit there and wallow in my own misery and go, oh, woe is me, the world sucks, like that. Again, like, I'm not telling people that they're not going to have that emotion. It's just, you can't let that emotion dominate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm not an assessment selection guy, but you guys have been through assessment selection, and I think that you probably have seen the guys that are successful at those programs. It's not that it's not hard. It's not that they didn't suffer. It's just that they didn't think about
Mm-hmm.
suffering. I think the ones that fall out are the ones that think about suffering, and they become so focused on the why am I suffering instead of the this is for a bigger purpose, or more realistically. I always like the I just have to get to the next meal. That's one of my buddies, he's a dev group guy. He's always like, I just had to get to the next meal at Bud's. And then other guys, long walk guys, have said, yeah, I just literally had to just put one foot in front of the other and just keep doing that over and over. And so you sort of, you sort of break it into micro tasks, and then you just execute micro tasks, and then you've made some progress.
Yeah, we hear this over and over through our different podcasts. Is the I the gist of it is that it's not your vocation, it's your skill set. And so many times, just like if you're doing the long walk or buds or whatever your selection is, if you're looking at that and saying, oh, this is my job, you aren't saying, oh, hey, this is my skill. Whether it's picking up that foot and setting it down in front of you again, you're looking at what your skill set is and where it's applied to get to that goal, that next meal, whatever is ahead of you. It's just using your abilities to do that rather than saying, well, I'm a special operations medic, or I'm a special operations aviator, whatever your skill is, or I'm a Green Beret. Um, yeah, that's not really who you are. But we talked about identity and being wrapped up in like it is part of your identity. It's not really who you are, but it's part of how you perceive yourself. It's part of the experience you have and everything like that. So it's that mindset on what your skill set is.
Yeah, yeah. I think just a real good to riff on identity just real quick, because I do think it, it affected me, and I do think it affects a lot of guys in the community. Is I actually had a time period where I wanted to put all my stuff in the closet, like all my I love me wall stuff, and like it was kind of a dark time where I was like, I have to make, like, it was very drastic. It was meant to be a positive step, but it was this very drastic reaction to this idea of, I am not that anymore. I will never be that anymore. And it is not helpful for me to have reminders of that around. I think I'm in a much more healthy headspace about, like, that's something that I did and I'm super proud of it. Like I I am proud of what it is, but like I also don't want to be Uncle Rico, right? From Napoleon Dynamite, talking about how good I was at football in 1982, right? Like, I bet I could throw this football over that mountain. Like, that's also not helpful. I don't think I'm ever gonna fly helicopter to the X ever again in my life. I'm pretty confident nobody's going to pay me for that. And oh, by the way, there's hundreds of other people that are way better at it than I ever was. Pay them to do that if that's what you need. So it's finding that balance of, like, what you were. But I think what's more important for me is it's not the red scarf, it's not the cool subdued patch, it's not the pilot wings, it's not the whatever. It's the, I have all these experiences and I should be able to draw from those experiences and then find a way to translate that experience, whether it's sort of an emotional state or a actual skill. I should be able to translate those into other things that I'm going to do in life. And I think the guys that are successful are the ones that can sort of abstract out what they did, and also sort of deep dive into, it wasn't like you didn't just, like, they didn't just hand you a hat and go, you are a Green Beret. It's a hat, not a person. You are a special forces operator. Like, you had to do all that stuff. That's just a symbol of a qualification and an experience that you've had. But I think sometimes people get hung up on the symbol and they forget, like, they leave behind all the shit that went into making that happen. And like, that's the good stuff. That's the minerals. It's not the symbol. Like, and there are companies out there. I think this is an important, like, tactical thing for people to know. If you're going to go into, like, the PSD business, or if you're going to go into defense contracting, cool. Like, absolutely, like, bling out your LinkedIn profile and keep the language very representative of sort of what your actual experiences were. If you want to do something different, then you do have to do a little bit of uh, translation. You also need to be aware of, there are companies out there that bring in, typically, I'll say, operators and not enablers. There are companies out there that are like, we love soft guys, and but they love, like, soft bros, and so you see it sort of in the financial services sometimes. You see it other places where they literally want sort of like a pet monkey. And I mean, I'm going to be very blunt about it. They want somebody to come and tell them cool war stories and wear the company fleece. And if if that's what a guy wants to do, cool. I think it would be probably emotionally unfulfilling, and that company is not actually invested in you as a person. They're invested in you as a symbol. And I think people need to be very careful about that as they're engaging, especially if somebody comes out and says, we love soft. You need to parse that. You need to understand what they're actually telling you. Do they love SOF as a notion, or do they love the skill sets? Do they love the experiences and the ability to translate those to solve their problems? Those are two different things. And unfortunately, these people sometimes have better marketing than these
Mm-hmm.
people. And so it's it's just a thing that folks need to be aware of. But it's also, it goes back to that sort of philosophical point that we were making a second ago, which is it's not the hat, it's not the badge, it's not the tab, it's not the scroll, it's not the whatever. It's all the stuff that you had to do to live through in order for you to be awarded that. That's the important stuff, and that's what folks should like do a little bit of sort of reflection on.
That's gold. Yeah.
It is.
I mean, that's gold.
So, what do you have left? Like, you're in this tech sector. You're doing what are your plans? Like when your wife retires, or with, before that? What's your future look like?
Are you going to ask me what I'm going to be when I
Well,
grow up?
so
I don't
that's the
know. I already
question we
told you.
always ask. What are you? And but there's some truth to that, because the
Yeah.
reality is, hey, we accomplished this. What's the follow-on mission? What are you going to take from, you've transitioned, you've got success in this private sector? Where is that taking you?
It's yeah. So it's a good question. The short answer is I don't know. And again, I've sort of made it this far by not knowing, and so I'm going to continue. I like I like my current job. In case anybody watches this podcast, I like my current job. I want to play this out. We're a small company. We're in the middle of a capital raise. I want to kind of see this through. I'm working on some projects. As much as I hate being a project manager, I actually like the project that I'm managing. It's very cool, and so I want to kind of get to a little bit of culmination on some of those things, and then I think I'll be able to better kind of pick a path. Um, we're still working through what my wife's next job in the Air Force is going to be, and I'm completely happy to continue to watch her on her journey. It's super cool. I mean, I know I'm biased, but she's a great officer, and I have a ton of respect for her just professionally. And so it's kind of cool to get to watch her work through that. She will retire at some point. Everybody retires at some point. I think from there we're going to move up to the Pacific Northwest. That's where she grew up. It's an area that I never got to when I was a brat, and when we were dating, I went and visited her, and I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is where I want to go. Again, I'm a child of the I'm sort of a child of the '90s, so I have this vision of just turning into Eddie Vedder, just like flannel and Doc Martens and a little Gordon's fisherman hat and just live in Seattle and drink my coffee. That's my long term life goal. I'd love to be able to sort of be like financially independent to be able to finance said life goal. But yeah, so that's kind of like the timing of what's next. I think the other piece that resonated again a lot with some of the other guests that you've had is I do have a sense of, and it's not a dig on the company I'm with, but it is, we're making a product, we're trying to make money, we're trying to do some stuff, and I I don't have a sense of mission. I don't have a sense of the same sense of community, and it's again, it's not a reflection on the people I work with. It's just it's really different. Like you can't, Band of Brothers is Band of Brothers for a reason. Like there's a reason that Shakespeare wrote about it, 500 years ago. There's a reason that resonated when they put it on TV. That's why we use that language. It's a thing, and so it's very rare in the world that you sort of get um, a mission and a team that are all focused on the same mission, and you go through like these significant emotional events
Mm-hmm.
with them, and you bond in a way that even like siblings don't typically bond, depending on your life experience. So I try to stay engaged with SOTIF. I would love to sort of have more. involvement with that group going forward, just because I really value what they did for me, and I do think that this transition mission is important. And then I don't know, maybe I'll teach high school or something. Like I do, that's something that I feel like is lacking in my life right now, is a sense of mission outside of, I have tasks that I want to accomplish. Like I feel like that's very tactical. Like I don't have a larger driving thing, and I recognize that about myself. And it's just it's a hole in my game that I need to address. And I want to kind of think through how that fits in. So
Yeah.
So I think that
is that it?
no,
I crushed
what
it.
it when we're having the conversations that we've been having, there's a lot to I wouldn't call it reconcile, but there's a lot to take a look at and think about the overall context. Is everyone going to be fulfilled in their next mission, or is it going to be like, hey, this is the airframe you're flying today, this is the team that you're on, you're going to move on to whatever the next, like, we're designed the way that we work, we're designed for a follow-on mission. And so to be able to
Right.
have a conclusive statement at the end of a conversation, it's really, you just say, hey, I'm ready for the next thing. I don't know exactly what that's going to be, and yeah, all I can do is say thanks for sharing your journey, your part of this journey that we're all on. It's really meant, you've imparted a lot of really good information that it sounds like you've had time to reflect on it. Joseph, on his podcast, we were really blessed with the insight that he provided, and it's not that the others didn't provide the same. I think the context he was able to put his career in and where he's at now, and you've done a phenomenal job of doing the same. So thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I do actually want to. I want to riff, if I can, just for maybe a couple more minutes on that last point. One, I agree. I don't personally know Joseph. We're connected on LinkedIn. We've had some interactions. I think he's just one of those sort of, he falls into the category of um, guys that you meet in the soft community that have these like just sort of amazing lives. I think the CAG operator that you guys, your
Brennan.
last episode,
Yeah.
his name escapes me right now. That's another one where you're just like, of course you're in a rock band. Like, why wouldn't you be? I come from a more, like, I never had a job in high school. I went straight to the academy. I went straight into, like, I don't want to like diminish my own experience, but you meet people from all walks of life. He's got a definitely, prior enlisted. He's got some of these other things. One of the first pros, and he's got a different life outlook than I do. There are days where I think I might fall into the category of guys who carry briefcases rather than backpacks. But I think overall we're actually pretty aligned in terms of the stuff that he's doing and the content that he puts out on LinkedIn. And I think he does seem to have a very sort of well tuned sense of self. And that I think is helpful. And again, I don't have as well tuned a sense of self. It's something that I'm working on. I will go back. I don't want to. It's not a Debbie Downer comment. It's a comment of, I think that if you've ever served in a soft formation, particularly if you went to war, I'm not sure that that's a replicable experience. And so I think from an expectation management perspective, people ought to understand that it is probably not replicable. And so if you have a hole in your soul that can only be filled by that, then probably stick with it for as long as you can. Otherwise, you just got to do the work to figure out what's gonna fill that hole in your soul, and what's gonna be the next thing that you derive value from, that is your next mission. And I think that, whether maybe it's not curing cancer. Maybe it's not working with kids. Maybe it's not even working with other soft vets. But you got to find what that is. But you also need to understand it's probably never going to be as good as what you had. And again, I'm pretty biased. You guys said something on one of the other episodes. I always call it like the Ernest Hemingway stuff, right? Like, and I steal this from one of my best friends, guy I knew at the academy for a long time, flew Pavlos, flew Ospreys. He's on the path to, he'll probably be the AfterSOF commander someday. But one of my best friends, and he said one day, he's like, I did all the stuff I ever wanted to do as a kid when I was a captain. And I think that that's the reality. And we're probably biased, right? Like if you go back to the, sort of post Gothic Serpent, pre 9/11, it was a lot of like defending the greater Southeast United States. And then there's a whole generation of folks that came in after 9/11, a lot 18 X-rays, a lot of these other folks that all they ever knew was war. And man, God bless them, they got all the good stuff out of the way, like in the first 2 years. And then now they're like, what's next? And you're like, dude, that was as good as it gets. Like that was the Super Bowl all these other guys were waiting for. You got to play in the Super Bowl on your first day. Like you should appreciate that and put that in historical context and understand that there is no more Super Bowl for you. I mean, if there is another Super Bowl, like nobody wants to go to it, I guess is the sort of piece. So I apologize, I was a little bit unformed, but I think that the reality is, again, it's not meant to be a Debbie Downer comment. It's just meant to be like it is going to be part of your transition. Is that you have had a very concentrated life experience that is not replicable outside, and so you need to figure out what's going to be the next thing that you're going to throw your energy and your heart and soul into. And again, it doesn't have to be your job. It could be something else. If it is your job, cool, because you get paid for it. But otherwise, figure out what that next mission is. Team Red, White, and Blue, Team Rubicon, volunteer at your local VFW. Do something. That's something I know is a hole in my game, and it's something I spend time thinking about a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's a lot of wisdom in that. I wish I would have heard that 10 years ago. But I think the last thing you said is so important. Is even as you're going through this process of self-discovery and you feel down about yourself, right? Like stay connected, right? Because when you isolate, that's when bad things happen, right? So stay connected, work through it, and at some point you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the sort of the good news part of that whole thing is that, like, again, barring friends that we've lost, like you can stay connected. I mean, we live in an era where you could stay connected like way too much with people. And again, I tend to be an introvert. I'm probably not the best friend in the world as far as reaching out to people, but I've tried to make a more deliberate effort, certainly in the last year after I was kind of pretty down with transition. Of I just try to touch base with guys that are my friends, guys that I shared experiences with, and it's a huge game changer for your mental health. And so, again, the story about the 18 series bags and the reconnecting with the guy that you went to Sockham with, however many years ago, 15 years ago, and now those two stay in touch, not because it's a business thing or whatever. It's just they stay in touch because sometimes it's really good to just be able to reach out to somebody that is going to understand the thing. And you don't even have to, it's not like you're telling war stories the whole time. It's just you have the subtext of you can be emotionally vulnerable with somebody in a way that you sometimes can't with your own spouse or with your brothers and sisters, and certainly not with your coworkers drinking coffee, downstairs at Google. You're not going to tell them about I'm having a bad day. Like, I don't care how much companies say, oh, we're open. Like, that shit doesn't happen. Like, it sort of takes somebody else that's walked the same ground to be able to have that conversation and know that you're not going to be judged for it. And again, it's counterintuitive because we come from this culture of strength and this culture of like suppress weakness and like don't show that this phases you, and it's like it manifests in all these weird ways, like never if they try to give you a nickname, you can't fight the nickname because then it'll stick. And I mean, it's all these like little like sort of like needly things. But I think like that's the sort of the sort of like frat bullshit that you have to go through on the front end. On the back end, all that stuff kind of goes away, and like once you've kind of proven yourself, then people can open up to you, and they know that you're part of the inner circle and can be trusted. But definitely, folks have to stay connected. Like they have to, you have to put that as part of your battle rhythm of just like put it on the calendar, make it a thing, have a recurring meeting, just get on Zoom for 10 or 15 minutes and just be like, hey, how's everything going? Cool. What do you got going on? This is awesome. Okay, cool. Awesome. Just seeing that other person's face or hearing their voice is huge.
Yeah, that's and that's ultimately what we're driving people to do here. So I just want to say thank you for joining us on this, and we look forward to future interactions and how you're able to help other people and how we're able to just continue this conversation.